Experiential Education. So I'm going to start out talking about children and what they experience when they go to school. Because I was a school teacher and I taught grades 1 through 9 for many years. And then I was in first grade, and then I had first graders in the family. And I think what happens is we're putting a child into shock when they walk into first grade. They've never heard of grades unless they have somebody older that tells them about it. They've never heard of tests. They've never heard of your name before. And, you know, maybe they're an only child, maybe there's 17 others at home. I had a woman this morning who has 13 children, and she delivered all, I mean, they were all hers, and she had full pregnancies. I said, gosh, you must have never gotten out of bed. But they're all different when they come in a classroom. And it is a great shock to them. And as a counselor, we're gonna apply this to their, case study. Do we really know what traumatized them at school? Do we really know what the pressures were when they went to school and how that all came about? So it's extremely important to think about what they experience and what maybe you experienced. And it's a very unique experience for each of us, what happened to us. Number one, you have to have a teacher who likes children. And trust me, a lot of them don't. Or they did in the beginning and then they don't after a while. And they don't like being a teacher because they don't like the education system, and it becomes about pay. I would have taught if they paid me nothing. I don't know why it's about pay, except I guess we do have to eat and pay bills. But it's really about the enthusiasm and the energy of a teacher. And does she motivate all children or just the ones that do well? Jenny was in first grade. She had a lot of experiential education, but I didn't teach her to read. She got a first-year teacher who didn't know how to teach reading, and so she just was really enthusiastic about the ones that did outstanding and just kind of left the rest and hoped they learned to read. Of course, we as a parent might not know that, and the child might not know that, and not know what's happening, so it could be very traumatic. So maybe they learned they were dumb in first grade. Maybe they learned that they were just not very acceptable. And they don't usually, how well can they relate to other children? And well, if you're an only child, maybe not very well. If you have many children in the family, you've got your pecking order and your way of handling that, and so it just depends on the child. So as a counselor and looking at at education issues, some of the most serious issues have happened in the classrooms. How many say that's probably true?
Yes.
But they don't come home and tell anybody because they're supposed to be good. We say, now be good today. What a nonsensical thing to say to a child. When the mother's never good, the father's never good, the kids are always fighting. Who's good in the house? But you need to be good today. Mind your teacher. And maybe you don't even know how to ask a question. You don't know how to approach, I don't understand, without feeling like you're dumb. So it's some of the greatest traumas are in the beginning layers of education. How many would say, as they look back honestly, that that's the truth?
Oh, yeah.
In those very first layers of education, there are some great traumas. My question is, why do we have grades? Why do we have tests? Why do we have evaluations? When we talk to the parents, do we like the parents? Or do we just hope the parents like us? You know, there's a lot of issues in that whole thing. What are the parents told? The kid comes to parent night, and I mean, the parents are going, what are we going to be told? And how are we going to handle that? Yeah. And are you, as a counselor or a teacher, really, really aware that you can inspire every child to do great things? And I mean all of them. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of that when you think about it? I had an exceptional first grade teacher. Her name was Miss Marius. In those days, all the teachers were Miss, and they were all old. So they hadn't married, they were old maids. But this was an exceptional teacher. She actually bent over your chair when she stopped to look and see how you were doing. I mean, she was really a good teacher. And I was a gifted child, but I didn't know it. But I had certain gifts. And so one day I went to her and I said, I would like to put on a play for the classroom once a week. And I'll bring all the costumes, and I'll take care of all the problems. Wow. And I'll train all the kids that want to do it. And when some kids get through with their work early, and they can go back in the cloakroom, and we'll have a meeting, and we'll develop a play, and we'll give a play every week. Now, the exceptional part of her is we don't have time in our curriculum. She never said that. She never chose that at all. She didn't even hint at it. That's unusual. And I did. Was I top in the school? No. Was I getting straight, I think it was S's, and you had satisfactory, all these little things? No. But she believed me. That's huge. That's really, really, really huge. Many, many years later, as an adult, my mother and I went to see her. And we walked in the classroom. It was the end of the school year, and she was retiring. And she said, I never had another child like you. And I'm sure that was true, because to initiate such a big thing and to think it was okay and to do it was quite astonishing, I'm sure, to them. So then I was in the rhythm band. We had music a couple, 3 times a week, and they decided I would be the director of the 3rd graders rhythm band, and I was still 1st grader. Now I want you to think about that. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So my mother made a costume, and I had this hat, and I had a whole costume, and I was the director of the rhythm band, and I was supposed to point, who was next and so on, and direct the rhythm band. I'm 6 years old, people. I have a June birthday, which means I'm a young 6. Because you can start school at 5 if you're going to be 6 sometime before September or August sometimes. So I don't know where I got these ideas, but I had a teacher that said yes and heard children. Does that make sense? And really liked children. I don't think she ever worked for money. I think she worked for the pure joy of seeing little people become effective. Now, in my teaching career, I have substitute taught for hundreds of teachers in dozens of schools. I mean, in every subject in kindergarten through ninth grade. So I have a lot more exposure and experience with teachers than most people ever get. So as we look at this and we look at that first grade, I think about this a lot. And I think about how remarkable that event was. Now, I was very traumatized when I did it. And this is what traumatized me. I was supposed to bow at the end, and my hat fell in the lights, and everybody laughed.
Aww.
And these were parents there and kids there, and they all laughed. No one knew how traumatized I was. But that shut down that creativity inside of me for a long time. Because a traumatized child will not know how to move with that, because we don't even see our own children when they're traumatized. We're so busy in adult world having our quarrels and fights and discussions, and you know what I'm saying, that the children kind of listen into all this stuff and wonder who we are and why we do all this fussing. So we don't see that necessarily. We just don't see it. And I never told anybody how traumatized I was, but I was traumatized for many years. Many, many, many years from just that one event. Now in the first grade, I decided I was in love with a third grade boy, which is the story kind of my life. And I was in love with him because he had keys. He had a whole thing of keys. And when he walked, his keys would rattle. I never had a conversation with him, but I know his name was Larry, and I was fascinated with Larry's keys. This is the way children think. They think in just the most basic ways of what gets their attention. I will never forget that conversation I had with that teacher. Because for her, I was an astonishing person, but I was just average at schoolwork. She saw something that no one ever saw. She saw the potential. Now, in this organization, we're working on the development stories of people's lives. How many would say that's true?
Very true.
And because we're taking it seriously, we're trying to understand that development story. And if you really understand it in all its ramifications, great progress will be made. But if you try to analyze it too soon and take it into a system, the person will know that. We get into habits of systems. I found that when I had to take what's called CEUs, Teresa has to take CEUs, Cindy has to take CEUs. CEUs are so many hours of credit you're required to take every year of classes. So you really take 50, 60 hours or more not of hours, 50, 60 classes to get your CEUs. And consistently, they could describe the problems, they could give a diagnosis, but they had no knowledge of what to do. It didn't matter how many clients they presented. I saw that they didn't get it at all. They didn't understand it. It wasn't there. They had no knowledge of what to do, so they imparted nothing. Of all the classes I took, there were only 3 that were worth the money, and I got some ideas that were good. But I think that's our experience a lot in education. So I want you to think about these things. I want you to think about your own traumas, and then how are you handling a client who might be 50 or 60 years old? And sometimes we ask questions, but we don't go deeply enough into the experience. How many would say that's probably true? we don't go really deeply into that experience. Really deeply into that experience. Because, gosh, we'd be here all day. Maybe it'd take 10 years to go into all those experiences. So we just try to move them along. And, you know, we said, well, it's easy to say, well, Jesus could do it in an hour. What's the matter with us? What's the matter with the clients? How do we do it in an hour? But he had one advantage. He knew the whole story of every person. I don't know how he knew it, but he knew it. And time and again, you see the hints of that coming through his work. I mean, he's never been in Samaria as far as we know, and all of a sudden he meets with a Samaritan woman. It isn't by gossip, it isn't by anything. He knows her whole story. And I tell you, when you get sloppy with the case study, you're never going to know the whole story. And they're going to know you don't, and they won't tell you. How many say that's probably true? Because they think they can't, or they don't know what's proper, and they worry about that. So you really have to put yourself into that position of, tell me more. How did that happen?
One of my favorite phrases. Tell me more.
Well, I'm very noted for that. When I die, if you ask the men, what's the most important thing I ever taught them? Every single one of them would say, tell me more. When you talk to your wife and she's trying to talk, and you don't want to listen, and you turn her off, men will listen to 3 sentences, that's it, they don't listen anymore. And instead I say, just say to the woman, tell me more. I didn't even care very much whether they listened, but I cared that they said it.
Yeah.
Because then the woman could say, I think my husband understands me. And women would shove them out of the house. Go to men's group, go to men's group, go to men's group, because it was making enormous improvements across the line in the communication at home. The 3 sentences men will listen to is the first one we say, which is the problem, and the second one, how we go a little farther, and then the third question they're listening for is the bottom line. And the bottom line is, what do you expect me to do? Or, they want to get to the bottom line. They don't like conversations. If you listen to men talk, it's very funny to listen to them talk. I had a very weird mother. She would tune me in on male communications as we were walking down the street. She'd say, you see these 2 men, now I want you to listen to what they say. And how they say it. So I was listening as a young child to these communication systems, and I learned many things. So as we say, when the men learn that tell me more is the key for the woman to be well and the marriage to be well, they thought it was very, very significant to learn that. But I don't think there's a single man who would ever teach it, because they don't know exactly what the problem is. Does that kind of make sense? That doesn't mean they can't, but it means it's not in their experience, so maybe they don't get it. For example, we're sitting in church, and my mother says this man is standing up in front. He's got on a white suit and a big diamond ring, and he's the chairman of the elders, I guess. She said, do you see that man? I said, yes. He thinks he's God. So I was being trained at a very early age in understanding the differences between people. Women were a big mystery. I didn't get women at all. But I got a lot of training about men. And later, of course, I'm leading men's group. There's a picture of me from when I was 3 years old, and we were visiting my grandparents in Ohio, and there are all these women in the background, including my mother. All of these women, about 8 of them. And there's about 4 or 5 men, and they knelt down and sat with me in the front row. And believe me, I was much safer with those men than I would ever been with any of those women. So, and some people have deficits. I'm not saying that's an asset. It could be a deficit, but at least you have to understand what your deficits are and how to get over those deficits. And as you leave tonight, I want you to ponder, how well do I listen to my client and understand exactly how that affected their life? And how seriously do I take it? You see, their case study is your handbook of what to do with the client. Their case study tells you how they learn, whether they're traumatized, what gets their attention. It tells you everything. It tells you everything. If you do a good case study, that's half the work. But it's the secret, it's the thing you ponder. How would it be best that this client can learn? What would this client want to learn? And do I really believe that this client is going to get better or well? I'll give you a case in point. I had a client and her father in my living room Friday and Saturday both. I had Teresa call you, and I called Teresa, and I said, cover me, it's a really serious situation. Horrendously serious. Now the girl has no developed faith at all, and she's a woman. None. She's 23, 24 years old, and she graduated from college, and she did all the things she was supposed to do, but no faith at all was ever developed inside this girl's life, which is kind of hard to believe, but if you look at people, we need to wake up, because that clue may be there, that the faith is not developed. It's blocked, and it's blocked for some particular reason. I mean, what's going on here? This is really serious. I considered it a life and death issue. She believes there's some kind of a God, but she has no definition whatsoever, no language system, no experience, and she doesn't define God in any way that he would be usable to her. So that's serious. That's a really serious case. And the night before, she'd been out prostituting herself. Although she's married, I'm not married, excuse me. She's living with her boyfriend for quite a year in Bolivia. She then called him on the telephone and told him what she did. How do you think that went?
Really well.
So, this is serious. These are serious issues. With every client, we have to see from their story, how do we reach them? And we're told to evangelize, but we're never told how to reach the person that needs to be reached. Does that make sense? And this is a very big, big, big issue, because we traumatize a lot of people, leading them to Christ and telling them what to believe and think and feel and experience, because it's our basis of faith. And since it's our basis of faith, it's important to understand that it may not be possible to bring them to our belief system at all. Did I think I was going to lead her to Christ that day? No, because there was nothing there that was going to respond. And her story has to be very important. Her experience has to be very important to you. Your client's experience is exceedingly valuable, and they're giving you the way to bring healing. And you have to listen seriously and deeply and ask questions and develop a comprehension of that. How many agree?
Mm-hmm.
The case study is not to be ignored, because it is the manual to their life. It is the story that will lead you to ways they can break through and understand. For example, did Jesus tell parables? Now, when he was talking to a group, he was talking to a group of farmers. So what kind of a parable did he tell? A farmer went out to farm. He knew their life. He knew. If you don't, as you study the case study, you're finding the clues to the parables that are there, but we're not seeing them. We've got our faith and our religion in this corner, and we've got our textbook here, we've got the case study here, we've got the client there, and boy, is a lot of differences. You can imagine Vonda's job. She works with hospitalized teenagers who are completely out of control. And she doesn't have a lot of days to reach them. Vonda's experience with me was very traumatic.
Amen.
It was really traumatic. I went down to visit her as a classroom teacher. What city did you live in? Corvallis?
I was in Corvallis at San Diego Christian High School.
And I went into her classroom. And after I was finished, I said, "You're the worst teacher I've ever seen."
True story.
That's the truth. That's what I said to her. And she'd always been told, "You'll be a great teacher. You're going to be a wonderful teacher. You're going to make a difference in the classroom." I'm the first person that says, "You're the worst teacher I've ever seen." Boy, I could have really traumatized her, and I did for a little while. But she finally decided to find out what could improve. And what was I looking for? Because we don't even know what we're looking for.
Right.
We don't know the answer. She's taught in the old systems of assign page so and so and so and so and so, and then take the test. The test will be tomorrow. That isn't a teacher. There's no enthusiasm about the subject at all. When we did family therapy camp, I remember one time we had a man who was playing Jesus, and he was quite retarded. And he volunteered. He wanted to play Jesus. And he got in the tomb, and the person that was playing, said, "Come out." He didn't come out. He didn't respond. He didn't respond at all. I said, "You can't quit until you have him." Boy, was that a learning curve. That was a huge learning curve. I think it's hard to be honest with ourselves as to how many times we just kind of listen with less enthusiasm, or we're kind of bored, or we're kind of weary. I saw 8 to 10 clients a day almost all my counseling years, and it was very tiring. And I'd go home and I'd say, "God, nobody ever listens to me." It was hard not to feel sorry for myself, but it was the truth. It just didn't happen.
But as you're talking about the man and playing Jesus, you gave me the assignment in my health class to raise Lazarus from the dead.
Correct.
That was my assignment, to have my students do this. So I gave them
This
this
is a
assignment.
health class, but it's a Christian school.
And we were talking about disease. So, as Betty always taught us, I gave my students the scripture to go home and read it to prepare. And I went home to reread. And I was reading the scripture and I thought, "Oh shit."
That is a holy shit, by the way. Never become offended. There's bullshit and shit, and they're allowable words. God likes them. He understands them.
I gave them the wrong scripture. So before I was able to say anything the next day, one of the students goes, Miss Winkle, I don't get it." So, I had to be human and I made mistakes, but it gave us that time to go back and reread. And I had 2 football players. One was new to the school, His dad was in Saudi Arabia. He and his mom were here. And the other one was really struggled in school. This kid, I never gave him a test. I always talked to him because he couldn't do it. So we're preparing to raise Lazarus. My classroom is in the music room. We got a piano. So we take the piano and we turn it into the corner and we pray for who's going to be which character. And the kid who had the learning difficulty was Jesus.
That's right.
And the other kid whose dad's in Saudi Arabia, who mom just left because dad had a massive heart attack. They didn't know that he was going to die. He broke his foot in a football game. He's Lazarus. So he's laying on the piano bench in the corner. The piano's got him in there. And I said to Corey, who is Jesus, if you do not speak with authority, Lazarus will not rise. So Corey stands up there. He goes, yo, Lazarus. But Lazarus didn't get up. So again, you must speak with authority. Hey, Lazarus. And I walked up to him and I said, you must speak with authority. And he stood there and he paused and he said, Lazarus, rise. And Lazarus got up. And then Lazarus is saying he tried so hard to get up off that bench and he couldn't move. He literally could
And
not
see,
move.
this is effective.
And the next day, I had all the teachers coming to me and asking me what happened in my class because the kids had changed.
That's how important these lessons are tonight. Vonda, you know, has experienced this long process of understanding the importance of knowing the client and knowing exactly the way in. It's not a game. It's a really serious thing. It's very, very serious. And sometimes they give very little space for you to get in. I believe that my mother was significant in experiential teacher because she would say, I want you to stand on this street corner now, and these two men are having a conversation, I want you to listen to it. You know, I'm maybe 7 or 8 years old, but I'm being educated in how men talk and think. She wasn't critical of it, she was just saying, just listen, pay attention. And some days she was very brilliant, and other days she was very big disaster and beat the hell out of me, so it was inconsistent. Of course, I was not very cooperative either, so let's be truly honest. But I want you to think about it. I want you to think about it, because some of you have had experiential teachers with you, and you've had experiential situations. And then others of you maybe have never thought about this question. What does it mean? What does it mean to really experience what that client just told you? I had a client once, she kind of liked drama, and she came in to tell me this very dramatic story, and I knew she'd kind of practiced it and was impressed with her story that she'd chosen from her life. And she tells me the story. Her mother sent her out to the fields to pick berries and warned her, do not leave the field. Of course, immediately then she left the field, wandered around, found a shack, opened the door, and her dad was having sex with another man. So there's the experience. What would you do? You'll be shocked at what I said to her. It shocked her out of her boots. I said, it seems to me you're the first one who sinned because you didn't obey your mother. She went roaring out of my office and drove her car out of the parking lot 90 miles a minute and came back a year later 1 year later and said you were right. So the experience doesn't have to have immediate results, but it has to shock them. Because if you hear the story, you can hear she immediately disobeyed her mother and put herself in a vulnerable position. This was the beginning of, the bonding between us was phenomenal. But it took a year for her to figure that out, and why I had done that. Esther Sink's daughter, she has an adopted daughter who was left at a hospital, and they had a car full of kids, and the mother had the baby, and she just left it at the hospital, and they drove off and left her. And she brought this girl in to see me, and she's a woman, you know, she's not a kid. And somewhere in the spirit, I knew I would only get one time to see her. It was going to have to be a one-shot deal. There were not going to be any second appointments. So I went for the gold. I had to go for it, and I had to break through. So I said to her, they left you, didn't they? And they went off, and they all stayed in the car, and they all stayed together, and they just left you. Oh, God, was that a trigger? You can imagine the level of trigger that was going on inside of her. She ran screaming out of my office. Just absolutely furious, just furious, furious. All the fury that was in her had an outlet now. I mean, we got in touch with the level of that child's anger, that baby's anger. We got in touch with that. And I didn't have a second time to get around to that, so I had to get there. I had to get to that baby's anger. So Esther and Jimmy brought her in. And I said, in 2 hours, she'll be okay. Don't pay any attention to what she's doing right now. She remembers that day as if it was yesterday. She never saw me again, but it was very, very, very significant to her because I didn't waste time with all the symptoms. I went for the cause. So there's a time to spread it out and a time to go, and you need to know the time and what time you might have. And that's really, really, really important.
That's a spiritual
Discernment.
yes.
I was just thinking that very thing.
Right.
How else would you?
Timing is everything. Experiential learners, they're all ready for this. Experiential learning, but their experiences can just be horrible. And just traumatize them further. Jenny didn't learn to read in first grade. She didn't hardly read in second grade. She was still leading much in third grade. She finally got to fifth grade. And I don't mean she was held back, but she got to fifth grade. And she had the right teacher at the right moment who was unbelievable. That's what I want us to be in this ministry. And I want it to be all over the world in everything we do. That you need to be this unbelievable person that goes for it. This teacher said to her, what did she say, Jenny?
She said she believed in me.
She did 2 years of school in that one grade. And by ninth grade, she was the top student in the junior high. It never would have happened. It never would have happened without one person saying, I believe in you, and there's nothing you can't do. If you say that to a person, they will carry that the rest of their life as something life and death important to them. So experiential learning, what are they experiencing here? And how did I come to this point of understanding experiential learning? my first teaching job was at 5th and 6th grade in a country school, and it was, I have never taught before. I had a new baby at home. I had a husband that was off the wall, and I was off the wall, and I was a smoker, and so it was just really a hard job. And I'd go to work every day, and these kids were just off the wall. 2 girls had just gotten off a boat from Finland and didn't speak a word of English in that one class. One boy was living in a paper shack with his family because they had no money and just barely surviving. I found out there were 8 broken homes in that family. No one ever came in and said, "You're doing a good job. You're going to make it. You have great potential." Not one single word of encouragement the whole year. Not one. And that's often the experience people have. We have certain people we always compliment. What about the people we don't? We have favorite students or favorite clients. I learned early, never have a favorite client. Let the favor of God rest on your heart for all of them. The instant you say, "Oh gosh, they're coming in today, I'm so happy," you've lost it. You've lost the work that God does because he has no favorites. He's an encourager across the board to all of them. And it's really easy, I would listen in the teachers' rooms, because they would talk about the kids, and I knew the teachers that talked a lot about the kids, and the teachers didn't say much, but were doing a good job. I knew every teacher in the building. I was in their room multiple times, and there were a few good teachers. There were 55 teachers in the building, and I was working for all of them. And there were a few good teachers. What kind of a substitute was I? I wasn't concentrating on what kind of a teacher they were. I was concentrating on what kind of a substitute am I? And you need to say, what kind of a counselor am I? What's going on here? So I figured out the greatest asset of being a substitute, it taught me to substitute for Jesus. And that he was the teacher, and I was just a substitute, and I had to do the plan the way he would have me do it. And always honored the teacher no matter what. Let's suppose the teacher had papers like this that needed to be corrected from weeks or a week. I corrected them all before I left. Never once in 7 years did I talk about a single teacher to anyone else. I made one exception, I will say that. There was a teacher that was a man, and he was head of the social studies department, and he was kind of lazy. He liked to sit on his desk and BS, and he was not very, he wasn't really doing very good in terms of being a teacher. And what happened is, on the floor, by the big map, there were a dozen maps lying on that floor that people were walking all over. They were literally being destroyed. So I went to the principal and I said, "I'm going to talk to you. I'm taking you into the room. I'm going to show you what the problem is. And then from that point, it's not my problem. It's up to you how you handle it." I wasn't telling him what to do, but I was saying, I think you need to be aware of this and understand. And so he accepted that. He took care of that. It was dealt with. But it wasn't tattling, it was just, do people see? Do they open their eyes and see? As an experiential teacher, I used to stand in the hall, and children would come and stand by me when they were in trouble. I never said a word. I never, obviously I didn't publicly pray for them, but they felt safe. It was like coming and standing by somebody who's safe until you're ready to go to the next situation. And this was very, very, very important. It happened all over the building.